Absolutely.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to this episode of Think Business Live. I'm looking forward to sitting down with Dan Russell Sr. You've been on the show a couple times, National Corporate Sales at Tryon Solutions. Michelle Cantor is here to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting. Her company, Volar Consulting, is doing some phenomenal work. And then we have Shenise Foote, who is the event manager at Alzheimer's Association and does a lot of fundraising and events. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate all of you joining me today for an interactive discussion on just everything that's going on in the world as we talk about diversity, inclusion, Black Lives Matter. And we were talking a little bit before the show, and one of the things that came up was, you know, Dan, you were telling a couple stories about how do we approach, you know, ... and what's next. And so I think that's a good place to start. And so what's, you know, expand on what you were saying a little bit before we press go.
Well, you know, I think now it's a lot of people are stuck in what's next? What do we do? What is our agenda? You know, now a lot of the protests have died down. You don't see all of the social media posts as much. And now I think people are saying, okay, so now what do we do? I think for some, they're looking for some guidance because they're not sure how to approach this. How do you approach this conversation? I've had some people just come up to me and say, is it appropriate to go speak to a Black coworker and ask them about how we can help? I've had CEOs come to me and say, I want to hire a more diverse population, but I know if I go outside and hold up a sign that says, hey, looking for Black males and Black females, and I'm looking for Indian, Asian, and all of a sudden they go, that's going to be a lawsuit. And I go, yeah, you're right. Right to the courtroom because you can't do that. So I think there's a lot of people right now that are just looking for next steps, appropriate steps, and a way to help people know that they do care. Great that, you know, and I'm telling everybody, there was really no wrong way to approach it. Mm-hmm. People that blacked out their screens. There were people that gave their employees Juneteenth off. There are people that are now, you know, forming panels within their own organization so this can be talked about. All right answers. But I'm just telling everybody, just take steps forward and do something. But I think that's the challenge. What is that something?
Well, let's just talk about that for 1 second, because when it talks about you know, doing something, that was a big thought of Congressman John Lewis, right? Made, you know, and I think it's nice to honor him because he lived such an amazing life. He was you know, a civil rights leader. He was in many cases the conscience of a nation. And an American hero who was a promoter of doing something peacefully, but doing something. And so on that note, you know, and any initial thoughts on that? And Shenise too, you too. What are your thoughts on what Dan's talking about?
So I'll step in just from and Dan, thank you for kicking it off. And Jon and Shenise, it's great to all be together. So I think what I'm seeing from a business perspective and doing this work with clients, and I see that people are definitely, like Dan said, they want to kind of spur into action and do something. And I think that's amazing. And I think, you know, for worse in a sense, because of everything that's happened with George Floyd, and people's eyes, though, are more wide open than they were before. And I think it has created some momentum. The thing that I'm really kind of telling current clients and prospective clients is that the work that needs to be done hasn't changed, right? And so what's really important is to be not reactive in a knee-jerk fashion of where you jump on the train to do something, but to be very purposeful and strategic in what you're doing, because you need to be in this work for the long haul. And if this work were easy, we wouldn't be where we are for 400 years. And if this work were easy, organizations wouldn't be in the situation that they're in today. And so one of the things that I'm really kind of trying to, and I always do, but really emphasize right now, is being strategic and intentional and plan why you're going somewhere and where you're trying to get to. And I think that will, number one, ensure that you stay the course. Number two, ensure that you actually implement and sustain lasting change. And number three, when the road gets bumpy, and everyone on this call can say the road will get really bumpy, right? This is hard stuff. This can be controversial stuff. And so when things get bumpy, if you aren't really clear in where you're headed, you will change direction, or you will make a knee-jerk reaction, and you will lose the momentum and you'll lose the impact that you're having. So that's kind of just a general sort of perspective in terms of a theme and ensuring that you're really strategic, intentional in where you go.
I just want to comment on that one real quickly, Michelle, because I think you're spot on exactly what you just said. And I think what's really important is that it's not just the leadership team that understands the vision of where they're going, but reverse engineering, letting people know what that vision is. So as you reverse engineer, everybody's on board. I see sometimes, as a business coach, I see sometimes going into companies where the leadership is up here and then they'll drip out a little bit at a time, and they can't even connect what that training or workshop or culture shift was all about and where it plugged into, because you only have 3, 4, or 5 people out of 100, let's just say, that are connected to where everybody's going. So I think that's important. I just think it's really, really important to be transparent about that vision and open with that.
Well, John, also, I'll add, you brought up John Lewis, and what a loss for our nation. I think a lot of people's hearts were just hurting even that much more with everything that's been going on recently. But exactly what Michelle was talking about, that's who John Lewis was. I mean, he had a purpose. And when things got bumpy, he didn't change his course. He had a plan. He had a purpose. He knew it was going to be hard. And you think about what he saw. This is a guy who stood next to Martin Luther King Jr. and saw it all happen. And even though things have gotten so much better, and I've had people ask me, and they've said, like you said, Michelle, 400 years, and they said, Dan, is it still, are we still that bad? And I said, listen, as a nation, the United States of America is an amazing place. It is. I still say there's nowhere else I would rather live. There's still challenge, though. There are still things that can improve. And I think one of the points that most people forget is we are not that far removed from Shenise and I being able to vote.
Right.
Right? I mean, you think about that and you go, we're really one generation or two, 1.5 away from that. We're just a generation and a half away from my kids being able to go to school with your kids, Michelle, or John, your kids. And, just on my flight a couple days ago, I was just looking for a movie that I'd seen before, and Remember the Titans was on. And I went, oh, great, good football movie. And then I just sat and I watched and I went, this movie's almost 20 years old. It was talking about something that had happened a few years prior, and it was real.
Mm-hmm.
You're watching the tension at the football camp, and then they all come together and you're feeling, oh, yeah, this is great. And then the first day of school, and people are throwing things and they're mad and they're trying to block buses with African Americans just trying to go to school. And it was a true story. People don't realize that. It was a great movie, but it was a true story. So, I think we have to stop and look at someone like John Lewis that even days before he passed away was still out marching with people, bringing about this change in a peaceful manner, no rioting, no tearing down buildings, but still pushing the agenda forward.
Yeah.
So I want to, I want to jump in.
Yeah.
Okay. I've been taking notes because I think both Dan and Michelle have mentioned a few imperative things, right? First, I want to say that I know this is your business coach, Jon, and this is from a business lens, but I am represented today as Shenise and as a Black woman. And I think that's really important to say. And I want to set a little bit of a tone. I was extremely impacted by the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and now Elijah McClain and Rashard Brooks. And I say their names purposely, right? Purposefully. And I also acknowledge that there are countless others that we are not naming that we know of that, and then so many more that we don't, right? But I have always been in this work kind of by default, just because I am a passionate person and someone who cares about all people. But then, of course, I live in the media and I have to think about who I am and what I represent in this nation. So to Michelle's point, the road has been bumpy. And for me, my response was atypical. Usually I am triggered and I'm angered, and that pushes me to want to do more, right? This time I was triggered and saddened. I was literally paralyzed. I was paralyzed by anger and by my sadness. I mean, there was times where, and thankfully I do work for a supportive organization with supportive leadership, that I could not hold a meeting. I could not be in a white space at that moment. I needed to be the unapologetic Black woman that cried. And so I needed to cancel or reschedule a meeting at that time. So the road is bumpy and we don't know. I know we should forge ahead, but in that moment, for those 3 weeks, I couldn't do anything but mourn. Nothing but mourn. And that was devastating, especially to me, being someone who is more active and wants to, go out and do things and push the needle towards positivity. Forgive me, I wrote the word controversial down, and I think that was also Michelle who said that. I still don't get why it's controversial. I don't. And Michelle, I know that wasn't necessarily you saying you agree that it's controversial, but more so it does cause these conversations right now, and I take my hat off to you, Jon. Unfortunately, they're controversial, and I still do not understand why. And maybe my wonderful panelists or whomever can enlighten me. But why does it hurt to hear the words Black Lives Matter? Is it better for me to say my life matters, or Shenise life matters, or Dan life matter? Take out the word Black and fill it with any pronoun that you want that is of a Black or brown person, and it's the same exact thing. So I dare someone to look me in my face, and not because I'll retaliate in any crazy way, but I dare someone to say your life doesn't matter, or when I say Shenise life matters, they say no, all lives matter. Like, that's what is actually happening, and I don't think people understand how hurtful it is to hear that in response to lives matter. And lastly, I wrote down one generation removed from being able to vote. So interesting enough, and I'm so thankful for how I was brought up. Unfortunately, both my mother and my great-grandfather are now deceased, but I was raised by the two of them, a grandfather who was born in Pillahatchee, Mississippi in 1908, a little small town in Mississippi in 1908. You can only imagine the things that he witnessed, the things he experienced. Thankfully, my grandfather had his mind about him to the day that he passed at age 97 in 2005. And so the stories I hold on to, one of them being the story of Emmett Till. He knew his uncle. He remembers his uncle being excited for Emmett Till to come up from Chicago, or come down from Chicago to visit them in the South. He remembers his friend losing his nephew. Like, he remembers all of this. And so these were stories that were told to me. And yes, we were 2 generations away, but this is something that was my life. Like, this seemed old, but my grandfather was born, when I was born, he was 79 years old. So though that was my great grandfather, these were stories that I heard my entire life. So it's a lot closer and it's a lot more relevant to Dan's point than I think people realize. Yeah. And I'll digress for now.
Well, that's okay.
That was, I just want to say just one thing. Thank you for sharing all of that. It just makes me think about a couple things, that the consistency of raising people's awareness is so important, because that's where I see, no matter whether it's business or in life, as we raise our awareness, we raise our frequency, we raise our vibration, and we raise our level of consciousness. And so I love, and there's no better way to do that than through conversations like this and through story. And so just hearing your stories of your family are great, because it connects more of an emotional connection. And so I think that's what everybody's kind of looking for, right? Like, what is the emotional connection from my story to yours and from yours to mine? And so I think that's so important. And you know, it's been said earlier, kind of, you know, the protests have slowed down, social media has slowed down. But one thing that we can't slow down is the continual sharing of stories and the increase of awareness and emotional connection, that we're all human beings trying to just connect and figure it out. And so, Dan, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just...
No, that was great, John.
Yeah.
And you know, Shenise, you brought up something really important when you talked about why is this controversial, right? And just like you, my grandfather actually marched with John Lewis and Luther King Jr. He was there. He was walking with them, and he was alive when I was alive, right? So you're sitting here and you're saying, and I get those stories from my uncle. I get those stories from my father. And then I'm going to then pass them on to my kids. But the controversial piece of this, I've helped several people understand when they've said, Dan, I don't get this Black Lives Matter thing. What I've said to them is, if we went to a breast cancer rally, and John has heard me say this before, and we're there, we're marching, we're raising funds, you would never see someone come up and say, oh yeah, liver cancer matters, and throat cancer matters too, all cancer matters. You would never hear that. No one is saying that those other cancers don't matter. But at that time, they're raising awareness and money for breast cancer. That is the event. That's what you showed up to. That's their message. And as you said, Shenise, no one is saying that other lives don't matter. I have said so many times recently, I have dear friends that are close to my heart. I have family members that are police officers. And I'll tell you what, if something happens in my home, the very first 3 numbers I'm dialing are 911, and I want them to come. And I appreciate them so much. And unfortunately, there are individual people all over the world, all different ethnicities, races, jobs, that are bad apples, right? And we can't judge all people by those bad apples, because just like African Americans are saying, please don't judge me because of this one criminal. Please don't judge me. And we've seen this now even socially, where people are coming out saying George Floyd wasn't a good guy. George Floyd was in prison.
So what?
Right? And what I've had to help people understand is I've had to say, wait, I'm not saying that George Floyd represents all Black people, because he doesn't. No different than I do not. Shenise doesn't, right? We're not saying that. We're not talking about his character. We're not talking about his past. We're talking about it was wrong for any human being to have that happen. So now the controversial part is people have to get past the statements and the titles and the lines. Like I had somebody say, Dan, well, what do you think about white privilege? And I'm like, I'm not getting hung up on what somebody else decided to use as a tagline for what they wanted to display. I'm not going to jump on some of these different bandwagons of statements. I want to talk about the root cause. And I've said to people, gosh, people have had to struggle. If we talk to Jon, we talk to Michelle, Shenise, myself, we all have our stories where, as you said, Michelle, it was bumpy. There were some tough spots. I think every one of us has that story, and I think we've got to get past the feeling offended. We have to get past feeling attacked. We have to get to the point of how can we as a people get better for our children, for their children, for just our nation. We have to approach it, as you said, Michelle, so eloquently at the beginning. How can we just say, here, what is our purpose? How can we get better? And let's really be strategic about it and move forward instead of looking for every chance to be offended. Because if you want to get offended, it's out there.
Right. But to your point, Dan, how can we get better? I may be messing up the quote a little bit, but Maya Angelou is known for saying, when you know better, do better. Right. And so just going back to some of the things that were brought up earlier, which is hiring diverse people. When you go into a lot of organizations and everybody looks the same, and you were saying, you can't put up a sign that says, hey, boom, 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 boom. So just moving, Michelle, I just want to kind of move over to you for a minute because,
Sure.
How are you, because you're doing major meetings with major companies and all companies of all sizes, shifting the awareness and getting them to move differently.
Yeah. So is the question specific to recruiting or change overall, kind of where an organization's trying to head?
Any direction.
Okay. So it starts with day one as we really sitting down and doing the hard work of figuring out where you're trying to go, why you're doing this work, and what this work is. And what I mean by the what, and this is some of the toughest stuff to do, but in terms of the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, those are terms that hopefully, right, are being widely used and kind of have become understood terms. But the truth of the matter is there's not a lot of definition around this, and there's not a lot of true deep understanding of what those mean and how those translate to an organization. So what I do with businesses and with leadership is start with making and defining what those terms mean for that organization. And that will be different for every organization based on who they are, who their clients are, and what they're trying to accomplish. And what's really important, and again, this state, is focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that this work has a very important moral and social imperative, right? And I think what has gone on with the violence and police brutality with Tamar Rice, and Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and as Shenise said, countless others, has, what I see a difference is organizations are now making that social justice connection, right? And saying, oh, we have a moral obligation to do something.
Yeah.
But it's really important that they also understand as a business where they're trying to get to and who they're serving and what their outcomes need to be. And that might sound impersonal in a way, but after 25 years of doing human performance consulting, a business is not going to invest their resources, make the culture change, make the process and systems and procedure changes required without understanding what they're trying to get out of it.
Yeah.
And so it may be more vague than what you asked, Jon, but that work really has to be get done, because then you can get into the bare bones of, okay, now we need to change our recruiting. We need to completely revamp our pipeline, right? How are we sourcing candidates? What colleges are we pulling from? Do we even need people with a college degree, right? I have an organization that on their job description had some qualifications, and we had some really honest conversations about, like, why are those qualifications there? Is that really going to get you the candidate that you need? But again, to have those bare bone, nitty gritty, tough conversations, you need to understand why you're doing the work, what the work is, and where you're trying to get to.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I could
Yeah, Shenise.
Yeah, and I try not to be as long-winded this time.
No, Shenise, the floor is yours. Right.
But a couple things, I actually want to set a little bit of a preface. So I am the co-chair on the Association of Fundraising Professionals Greater Detroit chapter for their IDEA committee. And that stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access. So you brought up a ton of points that have made me think of a few things. And I'll start with this. So we are now in the midst of creating a series around race in the workplace, more so from a fundraising lens, but I do think this conversation in this series can lend itself to all industries. But in my research, I found these few statistics that I think is important to kind of read off, so forgive me for reading. Highly inclusive organizations generate 2.3 times more cash flow per employee, 1.4 times more revenue, and are 120% more capable of meeting financial targets. And this is according to Gartner, which is a global research and advisory firm. So that all those statistics to me say that representation matters, right? And so I think businesses often want to hear the bottom line, and numbers, let's just be honest, is the bottom line, whether you're in fundraising or whichever industry that you're in. And so those numbers go to show you why it's important to have a diverse workplace. In addition to, it's just right? it's just you should.
Can I make one comment on that?
Yeah,
I want to break your momentum, but I agree with you. Everybody somehow needs to quantify it back to the bottom line, right? Which is kind of, but also what I love about the name of your committee is and what it stands for, but just the word idea. The best ideas come from a previous idea, and when you're brainstorming in a room, if everybody has the same backstory and everybody looks exactly the same, you don't get the best ideas to elevate any idea. And so I just, to me, I think sometimes people don't understand the power and the value of an idea. Sometimes it can be so small, but it can have a universal impact. So I just wanted to comment real quickly on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Not a problem. Feel free to interject at any point. So another thing, Michelle kind of talked about recruiting diverse staff members and kind of everything that we just spoke about, right? And I think that is so important, but where a lot of organizations tend to fall off and there's a discrepancy is sustaining that same recruited diverse workforce, right? So it's not about what it looks like, right? Like here, this is a very beautiful display of diversity. We have 2 women, 2 men, 2 people of color, 2 people not of color. So it can look one way, right? But having a workplace that is sustainable, because oftentimes, and this has been my story, and luckily I'm not in that situation anymore, but you get there and you're the outsider and you feel like you're the outsider and you don't feel like you belong. And it takes a really strong person to push through that and want to stay. So I think beyond recruitment, organizations needs to focus on creating a welcoming but yet sustainable workplace for those people of color. I give this example all the time, so even if they see it, it won't surprise them. But this is when I was working in Ann Arbor, and I won't mention the institution, but or the organization, but I was in an all-white space, which is fine. I've been there before, and that was the most uncomfortable I've ever been in my life, coming from the east side of Detroit, going to traditionally what we call like a private white institution where most of the people there were white. I didn't really experience culture shock until I worked in Ann Arbor, even though it's supposed to be diverse. And just a couple quick examples. Everyone was against plasticware. Everyone was against plasticware. Everyone brought glass containers, and I'm like, the eyeball out because I have a plastic fork. It was little small things like that, or I had a colleague who he identified as a gay white male, and he would say things like, oh, I'm going to Taco Bell. And he came from humble beginnings as well. And people would say like, oh my gosh, Taco Bell. And he's like, this is what I can afford. I understand that this might not be the best health decision for me to eat, but what I wanted, and they have a menu that I can afford. And I think oftentimes people don't realize that your story is more than what you look like. And so though that particular place was diverse on how it looked, and Ann Arbor is diverse on how it looks, it doesn't always have a sustainable welcoming space. And then the last thing I'll add, and then anyone can interject, is around the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Michelle has heard me say this a million times, but equity to me is the most important word that often gets left off. You often hear about diversity and inclusion, but if you go into a workspace and all of the people of color are entry level or janitors or whatever position at the bottom of the totem pole, what does that say about people of color in your organization? So what we need to start thinking about is equity and how you represent people of color throughout your organization, and having diverse people on your board, in your senior leadership, in positions that when there are layoffs, they're not the most impacted. We've seen with COVID, so many organizations having to lay people off. And unfortunately, I've seen where if it were 15 laid off, 12 of them were Black. And I give that stat, that is a real stat, and I won't attribute which organization, but if they're all at the bottom, that speaks more volumes than having a diverse workplace.
And Shenise, I'll add something. As change is made, I'm also going to speak to the African Americans, the Indians, the Asian American that will watch this show. There will be times that you are the first, and that's okay. And there is a responsibility. And I'm saying this to some of the CEOs and hiring managers that will watch this show. There is a responsibility that we feel as Blacks. I know for a fact, Shenise, when she was walking in as the only African American there, she felt the pressure. And I'm going to say this, I don't know any other way to say it. She felt the pressure of the African American Black society on her shoulders to perform, to have a level of excellence, because she understood that if she did well, she may open a door for the next person to be hired. And we feel that at schools sometimes. We feel that in careers or jobs or meetings, because you are the only executive. It's one of those things where Jon, and I hope you're okay with me sharing this, Jon said something to me one time, and he said, Dan, there's so many cultures that you don't know what their culture is, but when you walk in a room, you can't hide that you're Black.
Right.
And I said, you're right. Right. Someone could be Italian. Someone could, be of Swedish descent. Someone could be Jewish. Someone could be, right. And there could be and they walk in a room and you can't quite tell who they are or what they are. When Shenise and I walk into a room, you know that we're Black.
Right.
And immediately someone can make a judgment. And so as we are breaking down barriers and as we're taking steps forward, we have to remember, okay, so I am the first. And you can walk in with a chip on your shoulder. And you can say, oh, I wonder if that's the only reason Michelle hired me. And I bet Michelle's hiring me now because the Black Lives Matter movement. And I bet Michelle has a problem with Black people. And I'm the only one here. And I bet everybody else is making more than me. And if you walk in with that attitude, you're already approaching it from a negative perspective. And Michelle's going, I'm trying to help. I'm trying to do all that I can. And it's already starting off very rigid. Both parties need to understand where the other's coming from. As Blacks, if you get the opportunity, you maybe get that promotion. Yes, you do still feel the weight of the entire Black culture on your shoulders, but just be you. Be you, be great, be the best you. Nobody in the world is better at being you than you.
Yeah.
Then if you are that person hiring them, guess what? Allow them to shine. Every now and then, it's as simple as just a friendly hello. And hey, Jon, wanted to let you know you did a great job on that project. Keep up the great work. where they go, oh, okay. Like it's very, very effective in helping someone feel like they are included. And we talk about that equity and we talk about inclusiveness. That right there, when they see that you're speaking to them the same way you spoke to the other coworker or great job, they don't want to be patronized. They don't want everyone. We would like to talk about how Shenise did on her project. Shenise, great job, right? Shenise is going, I get it. Thank you, but I really didn't want that. So, Michelle, to your points earlier, this is where people need to lean on experts, right? And I'm not going to just do a plug for all three of you, but I am going to do a plug for all three of you and even my organization. It's what we do, right? This is something where Michelle, Shenise, Jon, myself can walk into an organization and say, well, let me tell you what 80 other organizations have done successfully. Instead of, let's guess, and we read a book, and I watched Just Mercy last night. And we're gonna do something, and I understand now, and we're on fire about this, and it's like no, it's like just because you watched The Hate U Give with your kids last week doesn't mean that you now know how to bring in diversity, equity, and inclusion into your company. This is where you have to lean on experts. This is where, and I'm going to say it, this is where as a high-level CEO, you sit down with somebody like Jon, and you take the gloves off and nobody else is around, and you say, listen, I don't like the way my company looks. Everybody looks like me. I don't really want this. Jon, where do I go with this? Because you know what, Shenise, you brought up the money part of it, right? Yes, everybody's going to still look at that bottom line, and great that it's going to be increased. But in my heart of hearts, I believe there are great people who really want to help right now, but they can't take their gloves off. How do you walk in and tell your HR director, hey, we need to hire more Black people?
But that's what you need to do, though, Dan. And I'm sorry to interject, but we have to do that, right? Like, right. I'm tired of the excuse of how do I? You just do it. And I'll give a really quick example. And I'm sorry to cut you in, but I just want to give an example. I was a part of a conversation about race and mental health, and it was more so on the side of, again, I disclosed earlier that I was triggered and just kind of how to work through that. And it was a group conversation. And unfortunately, in the beginning of that conversation, though we were told it was going to be about race and mental health, it wasn't. And I thought to myself, do I just hang up? I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I am exhausted of always being the voice, always being the Black voice, always being the Black female voice, right? And instead, I spoke up and I said, I thought this conversation was about race and mental health. I would like to segue it there. After, the conversation segued, we discussed it. And afterwards, I had someone who I did to me and say, thank you for speaking up, because I don't know why it was so general in the beginning. I was thinking I was going to say something, but I just didn't know how. Normally, Shenise is warm, inviting. Oh, don't worry about it. That's okay. But again, I'm really tired, you guys. And I know you don't know me, but I'm exhausted. And I'm no longer giving that bridge. And my response was, I'm exhausted. You could have did exactly what I did. And luckily we had that relationship where we talked it out and it was no hard feelings. But you just do it. When you want to see change, you stand on the right side of history. You don't go, oh my God, what do I say to my HR director or my executive director or my CEO? You just say it. You just do it.
And Shenise, to your point exactly, I think the challenge for most organizations is they don't have a Shenise there. They don't have that person to spark that conversation. So now deep down inside, they're saying, I want to make change. If I go to my HR director, I just spoke to a ton of HR professionals just last week, had some amazing conversations. Many of them come up to me and say, my owner came up to me and tasked me with this, and we haven't been able to figure this out as a nation for years. And I'm supposed to figure it out for my company. I didn't learn this in school, right? So that challenge, when a person sits down, they meet with their business coach, the CEO is saying, hey, Jon, where do I go? Then Jon says, hey, listen, let me plug you in with Shenise. Let me plug you in with Michelle. Here's some people who can come in and get from you what you're trying to accomplish and put together a plan. So then, Shenise, to your point that was very well made, now you walk in and say to your organization, as a leader, I want to make change. I want to bring more in. And then let's go even further. I'm just Black. Hey, I want to see more women in the workplace. I want to see more women rise up as executives. I want to see more young adults. Maybe I'm looking around and my office is full of older white males, and we need more diversity. And that word diversity goes beyond Black and white. So now somebody can come in and say, you know what? I want to make change, as you just said, and I'm not going to sit on the sidelines anymore. I'm going to get in the game and I'm going to do something about it. But I think the key is exactly what's happening today. We have 4 different representations, and all of us can come together and share our background, our insight. And when something like this continues to happen, that's when organizations get better. That's when communities get better. And that's when you also go home and have the conversation with your kids as well. Because again, as a nation, we can't get better unless we actually take care of our home first. And I'm going to say this final thing. Please talk to your kids about this. Please, please, please. Because otherwise, your kids may not know the feelings you have in your heart of acceptance of all people, and that you do see someone like, people don't want you to say, I don't see you as Black. I see clear. No, I want John and Michelle to see me as a Black male, but not to judge me or treat me differently because I'm a Black male. So when you go home and you talk to your kids, and it's not, Dan, my Black friend, right? Because then your kids go, okay, Dad never described his other friends as his white friend, Dan, but why is it his Black friend, Dan? No, when you go home and it's, oh yeah, I've got a friend, Dan, and okay, great. And then when they see me and they go, oh, that's Dan. And that is how, again, when you have these conversations with your kids, and do not think that they're too young, because I recently had a conversation with my 11-year-old that I thought that I had placed in a bubble and tried to keep him away from all this anger and hurt and animosity happening. Nope, wrong. He felt it. He was crying about it. It hurts.
It's heartbreaking.
Please have a conversation with your kids. Please sit down and let them know how you feel. Please let them know that, because otherwise your kids are going to get raised by social media. Your kids are going to get raised by their friends at school saying some dumb things that they've heard and now they're repeating. And then also think about your conversations at home, because certain things that are said that get into a kid's head, things like Shenise, I'm sure, has heard for her entire life, like I have, oh, you don't talk Black. I mean, you're not really Black. And then you have to go, I don't understand. What do you mean? Well, you don't talk Black. Well, how do you speak a color? I don't understand. and then they say, well, you're not ghetto, and you're not, like you're from the hood, and so then I'll say, oh, so you mean that I'm an eloquent speaker, and you mean that I'm highly educated? And they go, right. And so then I say, so what you're saying is the opposite of being eloquent or the opposite of being educated is Black. And then they freeze and they go, well, that's not what I was trying to say. I understand, but that is what you just said.
Right.
And so if I'm a child and I hear that, what do I think? To be Black is bad. To be Black is uneducated. To be Black, right? So all of a sudden, that little statement that your kid heard starts to get deeply rooted in their thoughts. So you have conversations with your families as well as at your workplace.
Well, I just want to echo that, the same level of consciousness that got us where we are today cannot get us where we want to get to tomorrow. And so what we're all talking about today is raising the level of consciousness, and not just raising it in the moment, but raising it consistently, and the responsibility we all have to consistently break down barriers and use our voice, right? No matter what, we all need to use our voice to raise awareness, to break down judgments, and to keep on raising our own awareness. So we just, you know, and to ask for help on what to do, which is my last question for all three of you, right? So somebody who's watching this now, tomorrow, later, you know, in a year from now, you know, what's one piece of advice that you would give them on how to get through, you know, blank, right? How to have a conversation that's uncomfortable in a blank setting. Like, what's that one piece that will raise a level of awareness for someone that will say, okay, I didn't know what to do, I didn't know what to say, and now I do. Michelle, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think the key, and it goes back a little bit to what Daniel was saying, is that there is no perfect script in crisis situations. And it is about all of us finding the commonality of humanity and being kind to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when it comes to framing that in an organization, it is giving people the space and the safety to feel. And that is something that I think hopefully a lot of organizations are getting better at. We're definitely not there 100%, but people cannot be at work physically, emotionally, mentally when we are in crisis. And our country is in crisis. And so and a crisis will happen again. And so I think it is giving that safe space to allow people to be and share what they need to share and know they're safe to do it.
Yeah. Well,
and I just want to add on, it's doing the same for your kids too, because our kids are going to they are our future leaders. A lot of them are our leaders now. And if we show that at home, they're going to start doing that automatically in the places that they work. And they're not even going to understand that that's a big deal. They're just going to open that space up automatically.
Yeah. Well said. Shenise, how about you?
That's a really big question, John, and I don't have all the answers, but I hope I can give some takeaways, some good takeaways. First thing I actually want to mention, and I'll just say it. We have to stop commiserating with the oppressed about oppression. And we have to take accountability to learn for ourselves and to seek that awareness and to seek that education. Contacting me, contacting Dan and saying, oh, this is so crazy. How are you feeling? These are my thoughts. It's echoing to a choir at this point. And any real change is going to be talking to voices who don't look like me, or talking to people who don't look like me and who don't think like me. Can we talk and can we brainstorm together? Yes. Do I need to commiserate about my oppression? No, because I feel it every day. You have felt it for the last couple of months. I have felt it every single day of my life. In addition to that, when you first asked the question, what came to mind was checking your privilege at the door. And unlike Dan, I do subscribe to the phrase white privilege, and I do think that it's a real phrase and a real thing in our society, in addition to systemic racism. But privilege is not just, I have privilege, right? I have straight women, so I'm a cisgendered Black woman. That's privilege to someone who's transgender, right? And so whatever that privilege is, because I've had to learn, and to Dan's point, diversity is more than just Black and white. So I've had to learn in the LGBTQ plus space and how to be more welcoming and how to be more understanding to those who identify as such. So I had to check my privilege at the door and just being willing to have conversations, but also taking that accountability and doing the learning for myself. I don't contact my friends that identify as LGBTQ plus just to vent about the oppression. I'm contacting them to get to hear their voice, to lend to the change that I'm hoping to make, not just to vent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan?
My final statement, John, for that question is the moment people stop believing that they can make change, they won't make change.
Mhm.
You have to believe, you have to wake up every day and understand that you have the opportunity to make a change in the world. It may only be one person, but that one person may go on to make change with 5 people, and so on and so on and so on. But the moment that we throw our hands up and say, who am I to handle systemic racism? Who am I to, help with social injustice and inequity? I'm just one person. Right. You're one person, that you have the opportunity to affect the circle around you. You have the opportunity to ask for help. You have resources around you, but ask for help, make it a point and be surgical, and go make change, and don't approach it in fear.
Yeah.
Because if we approach it in fear, we are all going to sit back and we will be having the same conversation another 20 years from now. It was over 20 years ago that Rodney King got beat. That situation is still happening, unfortunately, today.
Worse.
It goes beyond white, it goes beyond black, it goes beyond police, it goes beyond all of it. It just goes back to, you said it best, Michelle, it is humankind. And we as people have an opportunity to make sure that 20 years from now, nobody experiences people, unfortunately, today of all different races and ethnicities and backgrounds have to go through right now. We have to get better. We can get better, but we have to believe that we can do it.
Yeah.
That's what I would leave people with, is get out and make a difference. If it's just in your community, you made a difference. If it's just in your household, you made a difference.
Yeah. Well said. Well said by all of you. 2 of my favorite quotes: "Be the change you want to see in the world," Gandhi, and not that this guy's like Gandhi, but Stephen Covey is not to go from Gandhi to Stephen Covey, but
okay, it's a diverse representation.
Is seek first to understand before being understood. And I think we're in a world right now where every channel you turn on, there's a different opinion, there's a different perspective, and instead of getting angry, I think we all need to just seek first to understand before being understood, and be open to raising our frequency, our vibration, our awareness, and what we've all talked about today is raising our level of consciousness. I can't thank you all enough for being on the show. We should do it again, maybe in a few weeks. But tell everybody where they can get a hold of you. Shenise, we'll start with you, whether you want to give out your email, your phone, whatever you want to give out.
Absolutely. My personal email is just snfoote@gmail.com. So that's snfoote@gmail.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm probably the only Shenise Foote, so you'll easily find
Shenise Foote with a silent E. All right. Dan?
Hi. Okay. You can reach me. It's funny. Somebody the other day said, you gave out your cell phone number? Yeah, I gave out my cell phone number. Nowadays, people can find you anywhere.
Yeah, I give my cell phone every time.
Yeah. Email address is drussell, RUSSELL @tryonworks.com. I can be found at, relyontryon.com. That's our website. I am on LinkedIn as well. And a phone number is 248-219-6360. And, I'm open to, again, referring and helping other people just take a step forward. It's not about gaining clients. It's about making, our society better.
I love it. Thank you. And Michelle?
Yeah, so you can reach me a number of ways. At my business website is volarconsulting.com. And my email is michelle@volarconsulting.com. But you can also just call or text me. I'm here both from a professional perspective and a personal perspective, right? It is just about helping people navigate. 248-705-9008. And I am on LinkedIn, but I think probably the two best ways are just email me, michelle@volarconsulting.com, or call me, 248-705-9008. Thank you. This was really an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. I could talk to you for another hour. Usually these shows are like 25, max 30 minutes. And I appreciate you all taking extra time. And it was great. I loved it. I personally learned a ton. One of the reasons I love doing these podcasts is because it's almost like a mini master's class, selfishly for me. I then get to share it with, whomever watches it around the world. But it was great. And so I'm very grateful and appreciative for all three of you. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jon.
Thank you, Jon.
All right. Have a great one.
Everyone.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and your thoughts.
Thank you.